Hello everyone. Welcome to video 3 of chapter 9. In this video, we're going to be discussing childcare expenses and what can be done to deduct those from your income. So, childcare expenses, this deduction was legislated to provide relief for taxpayers who incur childcare expenses to work, carry on a business, conduct research connected to a research grant. Basically, if you have children, in order to work, someone needs to watch those children. So you can put your children in childcare and you'll be allowed to deduct up to a certain amount of those expenses against the income that you incurred the childcare to make. So in order to claim childcare expenses, you need to have what they call earned income. You need to have income from a source that requires you to be there every day to warrant having your child in childcare. You can't deduct these expenses if you don't work and you want there's reasons you might want your children to socialize or have more structured routines. You might put them in childcare, but that's good for the child. But if it's not related to you earning income, then you can't expense the childcare expenses. So childcare expenses can include day nurseries or daycare, what they often call. They can be babysitting services. Boarding schools will usually have, if you have a child in boarding school, they'll have a tuition amount, but they'll also have an amount related to caring and, feeding your child. And there's also camps. So if you have your children during the summer go to a day camp or a sleepaway camp, there's a specific rate you can use for those, and I'll discuss that in a minute. So fees must be paid to a resident of Canada who is not the mother or father, a supporting person, or a family member less than 18 years of age. So the child care can't be provided by a family member who's doing it, just to support family. Family units have a mutual benefit to watch and care for their children. And that doesn't mean it's directly related to earning income. It's if you have to pay money to an outside source. If my father lives with us and I'm paying him money to watch our children, that money's still staying within the family unit. The financial strength of the family as a whole is the same, whether the money's in my hands or this family member. So it's when you pay it to an individual outside your family, and also they want it to be a resident of Canada because they want that income to be recognized. You're getting an expense from your income, so they're losing tax revenue, but they'll be picking up that tax revenue on the other side of the person declaring it on their income. So eligible child has to be a child of individual or the spouse, child dependent on the individual or spouse, and they depend for support and whose net income does not exceed the basic personal amount. So if your child's earning income and that's using up the credits, that's sort of an insinuation that your child can care for itself, at least in some nominal way. If it can't, then the expenses paid for them to go to childcare would be considered against the child's income, right? So if I'm spending $10,000 for childcare, but my child is making $15,000, um, they don't want us to be subtracting from a higher income individual for the benefit of a family member who is making money. So under 16 at some time, but the child in care is under 16 at some time during the year. 16 above is considered they can care for themselves, at least for a daytime, or 16 or older and dependent by reason of mental or physical infirmity. So if the person is over 16 years old, maybe they require the care because they have an infirmity. Someone needs to be with them during the day. So it's not as simple to just say they're 18, they can look after themselves. There's a medical reason they cannot. So a child who lives with you, depends on you, and is under 16 are the general rules. So how much can you claim? If your child has a disability that warrants the disability tax credit, then caring for them is expected to be slightly more. So it has the highest rate of $11,000 per child. $8,000 if the child is 6 years or less at the end of the year. Small children and infants and toddlers require more focus and attention and care. $5,000 for children age 7 to 16. Children in that age range are expected that, yes, you need to watch them, make sure they're safe, but they can generally play on their own for a period of time during the day. So they cost less money from a childcare perspective. If an infirm dependent child 17 and over that is not eligible for the disability tax credit. So I have a child that has an infirmity but not a disability, so they won't get the 11,000 rate, but they can still qualify for the 5. I don't think we throw that case at you too much. I think we'll let you know whether or not a child is eligible for the disability credit or not. So the 11, 8 is, and 5 are the 11,000, 8,000, 5,000 are customarily what we work with. I mentioned that if your child goes to camp, that also counts as childcare. The difference between daytime nurseries are that's usually a consistent daycare provider while you're going to work through the year. Camps are often for just a certain amount of time, maybe only for a week at a time. You usually pay camps on a daily or weekly basis. So that rate is 1/40th of what it usually would be. So my eligible for disability child is $11,000. So if there's a summer camp or a day camp that I want to send them to for a week, then I can have 1/40th. So the annual limit being $275. So as long as I'm paying $275 or less for each week of that camp, I'll be able to claim the full amount. But if it's $300 a week, I can only claim that 275. But remember that is per week, so that does accumulate, but it can't accumulate more than the rate given. So 11,000, 8,000, or 5. So if my child is in camp all the time and I'm spending $125 per week, I'll hit that maximum in 40 weeks. I mentioned that these deductions apply against earned income. So earned income needs to be salaries, wages, other remunerations, business income, or scholarships, training allowance, or research grants. So that needs to be either pursuant to work, business, or education. The other source of income we often talk about is property income, so interest and dividends. Although that's a source of income, that's an income related to ownership of capital and is not considered earned income for the purposes of childcare expenses. So the supporting person can be a child's parent, spouse of child's parent, individual who can claim tax credit for child. What this is saying is, I think it says on the next page. So to qualify as a supporting person, individual must have resided with individual claiming childcare expenses sometime during the year. So I, as my child's parent, could claim the expense. If I live with a spouse who's actually a step parent, because they live with us, they are a supporting person. If it's someone else in the house who has income, they can claim the tax credit for child as long as they're an eligible dependent or Canadian caregiver. So I have someone in my house, my father lives with us so he can watch our kids. He does earn some income, so he can be qualified as a supporting person. When we have multiple supporting persons, so if we have two parents, the deduction available to the lower net income individual. If one person is working and the other person is not working, the social expectation is the person not working is principally giving care to the children in the home. So they have lower income, so the child care expenses will apply against their income. So deductions only available to the lower net income individual. If the lower net income has no income at all, you can't claim childcare expenses. But if one person's making 80,000 and another person 50, they will apply against the $50,000 income. It is limited in three ways. The actual amount paid. Now, please remember that whenever you have any type of these expenses to be deducted, childcare, moving expenses, what you actually paid is always a limit. You can never deduct more than you paid for something. So the second limit is the sum of the annual childcare expenses. Those are the 11, 8, and $5,000 we mentioned before. So if I have a child who's 6 years or less, let's say I have a 5-year-old and I spent $7,000 for their daycare in the year, I can only expense $7,000, right? That's how much I paid. I'm always limited to how much I paid, even though that rate they provide is higher. They're allowing me 8,000, I only paid 7. But if I paid $10,000 for childcare, well, I can only expense up to 8,000. So I'm always taking the lower number between what I paid and how much they've given me as an allowance or as an annual amount. The third is 2/3 of an individual's net income. So because we're always applying it to the lower net income individual, I think the 2/3 is kind of a measure to make sure that it's worthwhile to have the child in childcare. So if what I'm paying for childcare is more than 2/3 of what the person's paying or what the person's earning, that last third is likely being taken up with taxes. So the person's only making enough money to not have care for the children. So the child goes into childcare, that costs me $100 for the day, and then I go to work and only make $100. Um, is it really worthwhile to be using the child? Am I really putting them in childcare to earn income, or is my, you know, partial income type or partial employment um, I don't want to say an excuse, a method by which to get out of the house and see people while my kid's in childcare. I'm not saying that's their reasoning for having the 2/3, but I do think it's a good reminder of why that might be the case. So, or why they might consider that one of the limitations. So it's always limited to 2/3 of the individual's earned income, must be supported by proper receipts issued by the service provider. So, what you actually paid will be supported by the receipt. I can't just say I paid $7,000. I need to show them physical proof that that's how much I've spent. Okay, so with the lower net income, the higher net income spouse can claim childcare expenses as long as they can show that the lower income individual was incapacitated or restrained or otherwise unable to provide the care. If they were in full or part-time attendance at secondary school or a designated higher education institution. So yes, they were in childcare, but it's because they were going to school. Okay, well, they're not making any money while they're in school. We'll allow the higher net income person to make the claim. If they were imprisoned or had some sort of medical emergency that left them unable to care for the children, then you can have the higher income spouse claim it. So if they were unable to care for the full year, it will apply against your income. If it does it have on the next slide? Yeah. If they were only, say they were in prison for 3 months, that's 12 weeks. So they weren't unavailable for the full year. They were unavailable for a certain number of weeks. The higher income individual can claim their those childcare expenses based on that same kind of weekly rate they allow for camps. So if $10,000 was spent entirely in the year for 3 months, 12 weeks, I paid, let's say, the $200 for 12 weeks. So $2,400. So $2,400 can be claimed in the higher net income person, but the remaining 76,000 needs to go, or 7,600 needs to go to the lower income individual. So I've paid 10, a certain amount is allocated to be able to be claimed by the higher income individual for the number of weeks they were required to provide the care. When the lower net income individual was available, the rest of expenses will go to them. So you will have your threshold will be it has the same limitations, but your periodic amounts will be under the same threshold as camps. Okay, there's childcare expenses. Those are the rules for it. Let's see it in action to help drive the point home. So Mr. and Mrs. Sampras has 3 children that are 4, 9, and 14 years of age. All 3 children are in good mental and physical health. So what this will do will decide those threshold amounts that we're allowed. We have 1 child under 6, 2 children between 7 to 16. In the current year, Mr. Sampras has net income composed solely of employment income of $14,000 after claiming $5,500 in employment expenses. For earned income, we are considering the gross amount, so we would add these together to say his net income was 14, but his gross income was 19,005. Mrs. Sampras has net income of 54,000, claimed business expenses of 21,000. So Mrs. Sampras has much more income. So we are likely going to be claiming the childcare expenses in Mr. Sampras's income. The total childcare expenses for the current year, all properly documented for income tax purposes, are $10,500. Determine the maximum childcare expense deduction and indicate who can make the claim and why. So for childcare costs, we have those three thresholds to check. One is how much did we pay? We paid $10,500. If we paid daycare fees plus, one of my kids went to camp, we can have, okay, we paid, let's say we paid for two of our children to go to camp for 2 weeks. We have eligible camp fees of another 800. So if I spent $1,000 on those camp fees, I can only count up the $800. So this threshold works at the same time, but it doesn't mention any camp, so let's stick with daycare fees. My daycare fees are 10,500. That's how much I've paid. That's one of the limitations. I'm not going to expense more than I paid. The other limitations based on what rate they allow us. We had one child under 7, so we have $8,000, and we had two children, 9 and 14. So we had two between the ages of 7 to 16, and we get $5,000 for each child for the year. So the threshold that the government's providing us is $18,000. So we could conceivably expense up to $18,000 because of the age of the children we have. We're also limited by 2/3 of our net income, especially for the lower income person. So Mr. Sampras had $14,000 net income, deductions of 5,500. His total earned income, his gross income, was 19,005. 2/3 of that amount is $13,000. Mrs. Sampras had much higher income. 2/3 of her amount was $50,000. Mr. Sampras was the lower income individual. His income is what we're limited by. So we have these three limits. We have these three ceilings that we can't deduct, and we have to pick the smallest number. Now, we have lots of threshold here, provided we have like lots of allowance in our amounts. So 18,000 is very high. We didn't spend nearly that amount, so we don't need to worry about that 18,000. If we had spent $20,000, okay, now we're over the 18, we would be stopped by it. But that is our highest of our three. Our income amount says we can expense up to 2/3. That's 13,000. So we were at 18. Now we're down to 13. We only spent 10,005. So when we go to our deduction limit, we take a look at our three results and we pick the smallest number. If we had spent more, let's say we spent $15,000, well, now that 13,000 is our smallest number, so that'll be selected. If we spent 20,000 and Mr. Sampras's income was, $44,000, well, now 2/3 income is much higher. We've paid over $20,000. So now we're limited to that 18,000. So these changes, we always look at our three results and we always pick the smallest amount. Okay. So that is childcare expenses, their thresholds, who can deduct it, and by how much. Yes, and we did get to that far. When we come back, I will discuss varying other rules regarding to income inclusions and deductions. Until then, thank you for your time. I'll see you in the next video.